and welcome to the next edition of Reclaiming My Mind. I am your host, Jessica Vaughn. Again, I am the president of the Democratic Progressive Caucus, and thank you for joining us today. Today we have a guest, Natasha Goodley, who is one of my favorites because I see her all around town doing amazing different things, which we'll talk about today. Thank you for joining us, Natasha.
Thank you.
And if you could, and I'd like to know myself because we've kind of met, through events, but tell me a little bit about yourself and your background.
Well, I'm born and raised in South Carolina, Sumter, South Carolina, to be exact.
Oh, okay.
And I came to Florida for law school. Mm-hmm. So I attended Stetson University College of Law. After law school, I was working with Rouson, Senator Rouson, but at that time, he was just Attorney Rouson.
Oh, okay.
I did that for a couple of years, and then I segued into higher education. So I worked for Barry University down in Miami. We established a Tampa campus.
So you represented them as a lawyer, or you?
No,
okay.
I was over the campus, and I taught in the legal studies program, and I taught freshman and sophomore orientation.
Oh, okay.
So that's always been a dream of mine. It was to also work in higher education. So I did that for about 5.5 years, and during that time, I started my own business, and then I segued into owning my own business.
Okay. And is that business political related, or is that something different?
It's interesting. So while I was at Barry, I wanted to start a business, and I kept thinking, what will I do?
Right.
And so I ended up doing a property management business because I had worked so much with landlord-tenant law. So I started the property management business, did that for several years, and then eventually started the consulting business along with the property management, and then just most recently revamped everything and just have the consulting business.
Okay, good, because I want to talk about consulting as we mentioned before. So that's a little bit about your background. Now, I originally kind of became familiar with you because I saw you all around taking pictures, but then people started sending me articles about what you were doing as far as paying off the lunch balances for some of the schools in our area.
Yes.
And obviously education and what's going on in education locally is a passion of mine. So that got my attention right away. So can you tell me a little more about what you did and what prompted that and what that was like for you?
So I was scrolling Facebook and I saw a post that said, if you want to do something special for a child, pay off the overdue lunch balances. And I shared it that night and went to bed. And while I was sleeping, I'm like, I really didn't do anything. I just shared it. It's not like I actually put a penny towards the overdue lunch balance.
Right.
So I pledged the next morning that I was going to look into it to even see if it was an issue. And so the next morning, I chose Potter Elementary because that's the closest elementary. Technically, if I had kids, they would be zoned for Potter.
Gotcha.
And I am a foster parent. So I had 2 kids that were attending Potter Elementary.
Oh, okay.
So I called them and spoke with the cafeteria manager, and she said, yes, they had overdue lunch balances, and that, yes, if a child was beyond the required balance, which I think in elementary is 5 meals, that they would get the alternate lunch balance. So
lunch meal.
Lunch meal,
plan.
yes. They would get the alternate lunch meal, which is like a cold cheese sandwich and milk. It's supposed to be fruit, but some do fruit, some don't.
Okay.
So I decided to do a fundraiser for Potter Elementary. When I called, she said it was like $420. So I kind of just figured in my head with the GoFundMe fees, $500.
Sure.
So
that would be to pay off all of the students in that school their overdue lunch balances, so that no students would be getting the cold meal in alternative.
Correct.
Okay.
And so it wouldn't be permanent because if they didn't pay it 5 days after that, they'd be back to the alternate lunch meals. But it was around November, December. I was like, this would be great for Christmas. Pay off the overdue lunch balances. Let these kids eat a hot meal for 5 days.
Right.
Merry Christmas. So came up with it, put it out there, and it was slow at first. And then honestly, it grew legs when Beth Erickson Shoup came on board, and she helped to start sharing it to people. And it grew legs at that point. So we had well above the 500 for Potter. So then everyone kept saying, well, what about this school? What about this school? So after we raised the money for Potter, I'm like, okay, well, let's do all the failing elementary schools. So expanded it to include all the failing elementary schools, but we ended up raising well beyond the amount. So we were able to pay off the balance at 20 Title I Renaissance schools in Hillsborough County.
That's amazing. That's amazing. And then do you feel like the community embraced that?
The community did.
Yes.
Yes. People got behind it. They gave money towards it. You know, a lot of people didn't even realize that alternate meals exist.
Right.
So it was very warming. It was.
It was worth all the work that you put into it.
It was.
And now when we talked previously to you coming over and I had asked about some issues that were near and dear to you, you had actually said that eradicating food insecurity amongst children is at the top of your priority. So this goes hand in hand with that, obviously. Was that something that you had felt a passion about beforehand, or did this kind of awaken that in you?
I found out about it doing the overdue lunch balances. As I toured, like some of the schools, when I went to deliver the checks, they were like, oh my gosh, come take a tour. And the next minute I know I'm on like a 2-hour tour of the school, seeing everything they have. But it opened my eyes to the fact that there are children in our county going to school that don't have food at home,
Right.
that don't know where their next meal's coming from, or just don't have hot meals any other place other than school.
Right.
So whereas when I was in school, when I was a kid, you know, spring break came up. I'm like, yay, that's 9 days. I don't have to go to school. These kids are like, that's 9 days that I don't know where my next meal is coming from. And the food insecurity it's not saying that they have no food.
Right.
It's just knowing that you don't know where it's coming from. It's going to come from somewhere. You're not going to starve, but you just don't know.
Yeah.
And that's a scary feeling because when we get hungry, we go eat. We open the refrigerator, we get something. But it's a scary feeling being hungry and not knowing where that's going to come from. Having an idea that you're going to get something, but not knowing when, what, where, how, that's kind of scary.
Sure.
So that's how I learned about the food insecurity issue. And after talking with the school district, because they were working with me to give me the balances for each school for the overdue lunch balances. And they mentioned that a good fundraiser to segue into would be doing spring break food bags. And so I adopted Booker T. Washington Elementary. And at Booker T, they had 480 students at the time. So we decided to do 500 bags and trying to get enough food. That was the goal, 500 bags, to get enough food to pay for the kids to actually eat the entire spring break, which is 9 days. I didn't know if I was going to actually have the funds or the food to do it.
Right.
Because 9 days for 480 students is a lot of food.
It really is.
So the district was saying, why not just choose 100? But I just couldn't choose which 100 kids would eat and which 380 would not.
Right.
So all my efforts went into trying to raise enough food for every child. And thankfully, from just donors across everywhere, individuals who called me and said, hey, come get this food. And it's literally like a truckload of food. They're like, here, from some companies here, local companies that didn't want to necessarily have their name mentioned, for their donations, to people saying, hey, I don't have time to go buy food, but here's $100. Go to Costco and get something. It was amazing. And just to see the kids as they open the bags, you would have thought it was Christmas morning. And they're jumping up and down like, I got cereal and milk and spaghetti. And I'm like, oh my God, it's not a toy. It's like food.
Right.
But just to know that they had some of the things that they like. That was, it would bring tears to your eyes to watch.
So what made you choose Booker T?
That was another school that I had a foster kid that attended.
Okay.
And I know that it's a high need school. And just came with the school.
What was the amount of work that it would take? I mean, just not even fundraising. I mean, how did you find the volunteers to pack the lunches? How many hours did that take? What kind of amount of, what work went into that?
It took a lot of work, and I'm self-employed. So when I'm not working, I'm not eating.
Right.
So it took a lot of work to pinpoint basically having over $3,000 worth of food and coordinating where to get it from.
Mm-hmm.
But I had like a core team of volunteers who really put it out there. They brought in people. I had someone that volunteered their truck so we could go to Costco and pick up the food. And once we got to the school, I think we had about 8 or 9 volunteers that day.
Wow.
And then some of the teachers, when school let out, they came and they worked. And we worked for, oh my God, over 5 hours, 5-6 hours, bagging all the food.
And that's just bagging, not even talking about
bagging.
Organizing it, buying it. Did you have the same thing in every bag, or did you have to mix it up based on what you got?
Had to mix it up because they were also donations, but I had like the gist. Like I had like whole meals right here, whether it was macaroni and cheese, SpaghettiOs, or whatever. We had like the applesauce, the fruit, that kind of thing. We had the cookies. We had the juice boxes. So we had...
Did you plan all of that out and decide what necessities needed to go in each?
Yes.
Wow.
So the district gave me like a sample list of some good items and things to stay away from because of allergies.
Oh, okay.
Whereas I'm thinking peanut butter and jelly were good, but peanut allergies.
Right.
So we didn't do that. But they gave me a list to kind of go from. And then from there, I kind of planned it all out. So like in my living room, in the foyer in my house, in my office, I just had huge stacks of like SpaghettiOs and macaroni and cheese and juice and all that.
Well, thank you. That's so inspiring.
Thank you.
So tell me, through working through this and paying off these balances and feeding children during their breaks at school and learning more about food insecurities here in Tampa Bay, what do you think people who are listening that are moved by this can do to help combat the food insecurity, or to learn more about this or get involved with this issue in our community?
Definitely. Feeding Tampa Bay is here. They're always welcome to take in volunteers.
Okay.
I actually, my company, we volunteer monthly. So each month we have a volunteer day that we're there for about 4 hours, helping to sort, box, whatever, food for people in those situations. And then also before any type of hurricane, storm, anything, they're in need of an influx of volunteers. So like before the hurricane hit, we actually volunteered the day before making individual daily food bags, which was amazing because I lost power for like 2.5 days. So the whole time I'm like, man, I would have loved to have one of those bags that I made. But just helping out with them, volunteering. If you have funds, you know, they're always open to taking financial donations as well. And also just getting to know your neighbors. Because most of the people who are food insecure, who are using the food from Feeding Tampa Bay, aren't your people who are just like not working, don't have food. You know, they have access to food stamps, and it's not a lot of those individuals. It's the people who are living next door who something happened. And whether it's one of the family members is sick, they're spending all this money on medical bills, or they lost their job, they're laid off. Car accident, something happens, and now they're paying bills or scrambling, trying to keep a roof over their head, and they're not able to buy food. So they're insecure for a week, 2 weeks. So getting to know your neighbors, and when you can see a change or you see that there's something that might slightly be off, and being able to say, hey, you know, this is what we have. Would you like some? I got some extra bananas, or, hey, this was buy one, get one free, and we're not going to eat this. Here you go.
Do you, can you tell me more about Feeding Tampa Bay? Because I'm not that familiar with it, honestly.
So Feeding Tampa Bay is part of Feeding America. And so I think they service like 5 counties. And they get food in, freezer food, non-perishable items. They get food in from and non-food items as well. So if you're in need, you can actually go there, sign up, and they will assist you with whatever the size family you need with food. If you're a nonprofit and you want to get food to distribute to the community, you can also sign up for that. And you go in and actually like grocery shop. So if you have an event coming up and you're like, okay, I'm going to do a spaghetti dinner with blah, blah, blah. You can actually go in and shop for the food and then, of course, give it away. You wouldn't sell it. Yeah.
Well, I've always loved learning more about things that are happening in our area and places that we can volunteer, because sometimes it's just finding out about these places and knowing where to contact them. So I'm imagining they have a website people can go to, Feeding Tampa Bay, if they're interested.
feedingtampabay.org. They're located on Transport Drive, which is, it's a warehouse that's on 50th Street. So it's in between Adamo and 7th Ave. I want to say it's like 4902, but don't quote me.
So there's the food insecurity, which is a passion amongst yours. And lately I've been seeing some posts on Facebook where you're talking about affordable housing and trying to help people who are not able to find somewhere affordable to live. And I know that, even candidates and in general, people are starting to talk about how we have an affordable housing crisis here. And I even know my mother, who's retired and lives in South Florida, is thinking about moving down here, and she's trying to find something that fits in her fixed income and having a challenge. And, I think people are really unaware of how with kind of the gentrifying the city and the downtown and the areas, that now there's really not a lot of options for people, as far as affordable housing is. So can you tell me more about what you've learned about that and what you're doing and how you're trying to help people in regards to that?
Affordable housing is almost non-existent in the city right now, unfortunately. And when you say affordable housing, the federal government has their guidelines, and then you have like what normal people think is affordable.
Right.
So in buying a home, federal government, 220,000 is considered affordable. Whereas most people, regular, normal people say that, oh, that's not affordable.
Sure.
So when we're out in the community speaking to, neighborhood associations and organizations about affordable housing, they're still looking for homes that they can buy for like $75,000, $80,000. And that's almost non-existent.
Sure.
Those homes are the ones that are in such need of repair that you couldn't live in it.
Right.
You would have to go in and probably put 40, 50 in it just to be able to live in it.
Right.
So affordable housing options, if you even look at the renting side of it, rent is extremely expensive in this city. Like right now, I look at it as a self-employed individual. If I didn't own my home, oh my goodness, the prices that people are paying for like 2 bedrooms or $1,200, $1,400 for a 2-bedroom apartment that's like 1,000 square feet. The prices are astronomical compared to what people are actually making.
Right.
And so there's, of course, everyone's asking for more affordable housing and renting options and options to buy. But at the same time, I'm saying, we have a city that has been divided into 4 quadrants or quarters, or however you want to look at it.
Right.
The affordable housing needs to be in each section. And right now, when you think of affordable housing, you think East Tampa. And so unfortunately, East Tampa has become the dumping ground for affordable housing.
Right.
And all the other parts of the city don't carry their fair share of affordable housing. And so what it's done is it's created a community that's lower income, that can't support a grocery store, that can't support really economic growth and development, because companies, grocery stores, corporations all look for income levels, educational levels. They all look for all of this in order to even see if this is a viable option. And we can't support it in East Tampa. I say we because I live in East Tampa. We can't support it there because we've become the place for affordable housing. Whereas if it was shared across the city, then it wouldn't have that much of an impact on the one location.
Right.
Not to mention, not all, but most of the failing schools are also located in that quadrant of the city as well. So if we were to spread it out, that would give you an option to say, I would like to go to this school. I need my kids in this school, and there's housing available for me to live here. Not, well, I don't have much money, so that means my kids have to go to the failing school.
Right. So what do you think is a solution to that within our community?
Spreading the housing out. Actually building affordable housing for individuals and building it across all portions of the city and just sharing in that.
So is that was something that when we're looking in 2019 for candidates who are running in city council, something to be attached to their platform and something we should be asking them about?
Yes. Are you open to fighting to have affordable housing in your district?
Right. What about county commission? Part of zoning, and wouldn't that be applicable to county commission, or is that just something? Is Tampa, you think, the only thing that's lacking, or do you think it's a county problem?
It's a nationwide problem,
Right.
so it's definitely statewide problem, and it's most definitely a countywide problem as well. So the county has the same problems and issues that the city has.
So something we should be asking of all of our candidates,
Yes.
where they stand and how they feel about affordable housing.
And what they would be willing to do to come. Because you can easily say, yes, we need more affordable housing.
Sure.
But how are you going to get me that?
Right. What does that look like? What are
Right.
the plans? So that also kind of leads me to some other things that where I've come in contact with you is the first time I went on, well, the only time, because last time I didn't go, unfortunately. But when I went on the Black Business Bus Tour, you were my team captain.
Yes.
Very competitive.
Bus number 1.
And, I had such a great experience with that. Right when I saw it, I was so thrilled. And I still have things hanging up in my house and treasures that I got from that tour. How did you start? Because Candy says you've been working with her forever. And, how did you start working with Candy? And tell me more about, the Black Business Bus Tour. Because I think some people have heard about it. Some candidates have gone to it. But I don't think people are really that familiar with it and how it kind of relates to what we're talking about.
So I started going to Tea and Conversation years ago, probably like 9 years ago. And so literally it's just people sitting around talking. We would do it sometimes at restaurants, or there would be food available. We talk about different issues, things in the community, what we could do different. And the Black Business Bus Tour actually started even before that, before I was even living in Tampa. So I believe it started at the Harbor Club, which is kind of around Sulphur Springs.
Right.
Yes. So they would
It burned down.
Yes.
The Harbor Club. Yeah, it was in Sulphur Springs.
Yeah. So they would have like a venue for business owners to come in, showcase their business. Once that burned down, I think that's when they segued into the bus tour, actually going around visiting. But I could be wrong. It may have started. I think they did start it before the Harbor Club burned down.
Okay.
And they would travel to businesses and come back to the Harbor Club, where everyone would kind of congregate, sit and talk, and visit all the local businesses that were there. So it gave businesses that have an actual brick and mortar, and gave them an opportunity to have traffic brought to them. But then it also gave businesses that don't, you have an online business, or, whether it's Avon or jewelry, it gave you an opportunity to showcase your business as well.
Okay.
So Candy came up with that idea years ago, and she's just been implementing it every year. And there was a few years where it was kind of a hiatus, but she, as you can see, she brought it back with full force.
Yeah. How many buses generally leave in the last few tours you've gone on?
The last one, there were 5 buses.
And how many does each bus hold?
I'm not certain. I think our bus had about 30.
Wow. It seemed like more on the bus. So that's 150, 200 people that you're bringing to different businesses in the area.
Right.
And is there any specific criteria? I know you said, because I've had some friends, wondered, like you said, they sold online. They might have an online business. Is it more just brick and mortar now? Is it still open for people who can come if they have? What would you say are the parameters or the criteria for participating in that?
All of them can participate, because if you have a brick and mortar, then you would actually be one of the stops on the bus tour.
Okay.
If you don't have the brick and mortar, then you would come back to the location that we start and end at.
Bounce House.
So Bounce Boy is where we've done it before. We also did it at, there was another location. Can't think of it right now. But wherever we start and end, there'll be businesses set up just like how we did at Bounce Boy,
right,
where you're able to showcase your jewelry or your cupcakes or your purses or whatever you have. So it allows for both types of businesses to actually be showcased.
Now, do you feel like that making sure that people support Black businesses and making sure that commerce is part of the of the Black community here is important for kind of rising up out of the policies that have maybe been created to suppress community of color? Do you think that it's imperative in that?
I think so. I mean, supporting the businesses is supporting entrepreneurship.
Mm-hmm.
And like I was saying, in East Tampa, it's become the dumping ground for affordable housing.
Mm-hmm.
So we don't have too much industry.
Mm-hmm.
So at this point, we can't sit around and wait for people to decide to come and say, okay, now I'm going to build this restaurant or this store. So it's imperative to have businesses be created, for each of those businesses. Once they grow, they then can sustain hiring on people. And now there's employment in the area. Now you're providing a service. Now there's economic development. So that's just kind of like the catalyst to get things moving. So everyone's support of those businesses is so critical.
Absolutely. I love the Black Business Bus Tour. I'm so sad I missed the last one. And they're bringing it to St. Pete, or has it always been in St. Pete?
No, they're looking to bring it to St. Pete, and the next one's going to be Clearwater, which will be, I want to say that's the first time for Clearwater, and it would be the first time for St. Pete.
So that's exciting. So everyone from Clearwater or St. Pete who's listening, which I actually do have some friends across the bridge who told me they've listened, please make sure you look out for that and support that.
Yes, Pinellas County.
So there's so much already here that we're talking about. Okay, so you've paid off lunch balances, you're working on food insecurity, you're talking about affordable housing and helping people with that, you're working with the Black Business Bus Tour. So then we come and we talk about your business, which we said is the consulting business. So tell me a little bit about that.
So White and Black Consulting is a consulting firm. I do business and political consulting. It's almost 1 year old.
Congratulations.
Thank you. So I've been doing political consulting for almost 12 years now. And business consulting actually was born out of the work that I did for Barry University. So when I was hired on, the campus did not exist. We didn't have anything. So I did all the research, the market research, the analysis, all the reports on where's the best place to put it, what are we looking for, what's our competition. So I had an opportunity to learn so much more about business just actually being in that position at Barry. Because, as an attorney, you don't learn business unless you also get a dual degree in business.
Right.
You learn law.
Right.
So being in that situation to actually see how everything's ran, I was in charge of the actual facility. So from pest control to cleaning to the setup for the classrooms, hiring the adjunct faculty, training the faculty, I had an opportunity to really operate a business.
Right.
And
build the infrastructure of everything.
Right. From the bottom up.
Right.
So I learned my business consulting techniques there. And I fell kind of into that loop because I started just helping friends and helping people that were close to me.
It's always how it starts.
Right. Try this, or you should do this, or how about that? And it was working. Everyone's like, oh, wow,
Right.
you might have something here. And so it grew. And so now I also work with the Center for Women. So the Women's Business Center, I help them out with business consulting.
Okay.
And I'm a nerd. If you didn't know, I'm a cool nerd, though. I'm a cool nerd. So I actually devised some curriculum for entrepreneurship.
Okay.
And I mean, from the syllabus to the text to exactly how it would go. And I held the first course last week.
Oh, that's right. That's right. You couldn't come one of the days because you said you were doing you had a course to teach.
Yes.
And so that's exciting.
It was very exciting. People loved the course.
So you got a good turnout?
I had
and you got good feedback?
Turnout, great feedback. It was offered at the Entrepreneur Collaborative Center. So everyone enjoyed it. They're like, this is exactly the kind of things we need. Because personally, we just need to really boost entrepreneurship.
Right, right. And when you say we, who do you mean?
Everyone, the city.
The city.
more specifically the city and the county, because we aren't attracting all those businesses that we'd like to see, the corporations, because we have transportation issues. So whereas before people were interested in coming because we had low incomes.
Right.
So it was nice for a company to come here because they can start off with $30,000 and that's okay. But now there's transportation issues, there's housing issues, where are people going to stay? So we're not as attractive to them. So until we start correcting some of those issues, what do we do? You know,
start our own businesses. And then, so there's the business side of it. And then in the political consulting, how do you feel? What do you do for candidates?
So I do every aspect of helping and running a campaign except fundraise. So I'm not the fundraiser. I let them know from day one I'm not a fundraiser. But I've worked from national campaigns all the way down to local campaigns. And I've been doing it for about 12 years now. A lot of people don't know that my level of experience goes back that far.
Right.
But yes, it started with Representative Frank Peterman. I saw him today, actually. Yes, that's where I got my start.
So a lot of times consultants get the slack for everything, right? Because, it's hard in politics when some people, their livelihood rely on it, and so some people, have to work for a candidate that they might not necessarily agree with or believe in to get the experience or to get the paycheck. So as we'd mentioned, and I kind of gave you a little headway before we actually sat down for the interview, I'm always wondering what it's like to run a consultant firm and, be able to still have the integrity to say yes or no to clients and really support and work the ones that you believe in. Because I know there are a lot of organizers who would love to, start businesses, helping and putting their skills into, use and getting paid for what they do. Wouldn't we all like to get paid for organizing and helping people we believe in? But you're always worried that then somehow you're going to have to kind of sell out or help people that you don't believe in. And you said that, you've been able to really avoid that and keep your integrity and work for people that you believe in.
Right.
And do you think that's because you have another business and it's not your sole income? Do you think that you've just been so successful? How do you think people or consultants navigate keeping their integrity and working for clients?
Well, I won't say all consultants do it.
Right.
I can speak for myself.
Okay.
I manage it because I actually live here.
Right.
So I live in the city of Tampa. I live in East Tampa. I live in North Ybor neighborhood. So for me, I cannot in good conscience get behind a candidate that is not the best candidate for my neighborhood, my community, my city, my county. I can't. So for me, if I'm working with you, I believe in you. I believe in you and I'm going to vote for you. And I would do everything to see you there because I know you have not only my best interest, but the community's best interest at heart.
Right.
So does that mean it stops me from possibly making the amount of money that I could?
Yes.
By all means, yes. But every night that I go to sleep, I sleep well.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that because, we need consultants, but what we need are good consultants that, do care about the communities that they're placing elected officials in.
Right.
So we're jumping around a lot here, but one of the things that we had also talked about that I know I wanted to mention, happy, and I actually wanted to open with this, and I'm ashamed that I didn't, Juneteenth.
Yes.
And I actually posted something about it today early in the morning before all of the immigration noise came out. And I had some feedback of people who weren't familiar with Juneteenth, which surprises me, but doesn't surprise me in kind of a sad way, So can you tell me, because I saw you made a nice little post about it today, how it's what it means as far as Independence Day, and give us some history on that.
Well, Juneteenth actually is the closest we're going to get to like an actual real Independence Day in this country. Because there's not actually one actual date where everyone was freed. Juneteenth is the date that the slaves were made aware of the Emancipation Proclamation. So unfortunately, there were places that they still remained in bondage for quite some time afterwards, but it was made aware. And for the most part, a lot of them were freed, not all. So when we look at Independence Day,
Right.
when we look at it July 4th, not everyone had their freedom on July 4th. So July 4th is not technically an Independence Day for all. It's just an Independence Day for some.
Right.
So if we're going to celebrate an Independence Day in this country, this is as close as you get it to everyone being free.
Right. Now, I have never personally like had a celebration of it. I've always, posted something because I've been aware of the date, but I'm always like, is it something that I want to say like happy Juneteenth? Is it celebratory? So are there, I saw like, I heard on WMNF today, they had like a lot of playlists dedicated to it and they were talking, but are there a lot of celebrations that generally go on today? And have you attended them and kind of what they look like?
There are celebrations. They don't typically always happen on Juneteenth. They usually happen around Juneteenth and within the month of June, but not necessarily like 4th of July, how it's celebrated.
Are you going to any parties after this?
I don't know of any, but if I did, yes.
So kind of on that, on talking about, the history of this country, and slavery and racism that's embedded in our society. And every day as I become more educated about history, I learn about the harmful policies that have been passed down well after slavery was ended and Jim Crow was ended, down to, just like housing, and suburbia and, the racist policies that were written into some developments.
Right.
But, as our country starts to battle, over racism more, where there's all this talk about kneeling and fights between players and, there are neo-Nazis marching in the street and our president, as someone working inside the Democratic Party, I've always felt like even before this election, as I've canvassed in neighborhoods where there are people who have told me, I'm not going to vote in communities of color because it doesn't matter who's elected. My life doesn't change. And I've always felt like the Democratic Party is coming closer to abandoning its base and really reaching out to communities of color, to minorities in general. We walk this line where we're more, trying to say we're a red state and we try to draw towards, courting conservatives, and we've abandoned the people that need us, and that we should be representing. We're the Democratic Party. I mean, minus the horrible racist Dixiecrats from like the 70s, but what we try to be. But there's always this internal battle, and there's always like, we're not reaching communities of color enough. We're not doing enough for community of color, which I agree with. But then there seems to be a division and a split in how to do that and what that really looks like. And for like the Progressive Caucus, what we've talked about is just going into these communities and being supportive, regardless of whether that gets us votes or whether that connects politically, just because it's the right thing to do. And the issues that we talk about are all systematically connected to our infrastructure and racial justice and policies that hurt minority communities, regardless of whether they're communities of color or they're, it's because of class or whether it's because of gender. We're fighting to try to bring equality to everyone. Right. But some people disagree on that, and they think that's not the appropriate tactic, or we're not doing a good enough job. So what, for someone who's working so hard in so many different ways, you're working from the hunger aspect, from affordable housing to commerce to advocating for your neighborhood to working for politicians that you believe in. What do you feel like, not even the Democratic Party, but in general, we can do to help communities of color, or to deal with the racism that has torn our country apart since the beginning?
Well, for starters, ask for the vote. You would be amazed at how many people don't even enter communities of color because they think it's a waste and they're not going to get the vote. So there's no need to even ask for the vote. I've been in North Ybor now for about 7 years, but prior to that, I lived in Carrollwood. I've never really lived within more so of the urban core. And in all my years being there, I can name 2 candidates that knocked on my door and actually asked me, and not just the actual candidate, but 2 candidates that had either themselves or a representative knock on my door and ask for my vote. And one of those candidates, I was working their campaign. So I don't, you know what I mean?
Right.
So outside of that one person that actually knocked on my door and asked for my vote. So if no one's even asking for you to vote, no one's coming and saying anything, you may not be getting the phone calls because, you know, some people have cell phones and their numbers change.
Sure.
Or they don't have the landlines, that stable landline any longer.
Right.
How can you be upset when that person doesn't vote for you?
Right.
So I would like to see people actually get into the community and actually knock the doors and actually ask for the vote.
Right.
And I know, unfortunately, many people look at it as, well, you know, in the heart of the community, a lot of people are felons. They can't vote. And so it's a waste.
Right.
But clearly, not everyone in your urban communities is a convicted felon who's
I've never heard that response, so I don't doubt that it's out there, but that one caught me by surprise.
Yes. I have.
I mean, when I see like Desmond speak, he says actually there's more Caucasian felons, and then that's a misnomer. So, but so let's say, you know, because I've definitely talked about canvassing areas, and some of the feedback that I've gotten from maybe some Black Lives Matter activists is that that's just pandering, and that you can't just, when it's election time, go and expect this community to support you and ask for their vote, you know, and that there seems to be somewhat of a pushback against, you know, that it has to be done in a certain manner, or, you know, that if you're doing it, you know, that it should be led by people of the community instead of white people, or, you know, doing it on their own. Or, you know, do you feel like that, you know, if, let's say, Democrats all of a sudden started canvassing this area, that it would looked at as more as just pandering, trying to get the vote and not really caring about what's happening in these communities?
Well, it depends on when you start. I mean, it depends on, are you really genuine, or are you like, oh, shoot, I'm down by 6 points. Let me hit this community right here and start knocking, telling you all the stuff I'm going to do for you. So, you know, people aren't crazy. If you've been out there and you've really had a voice in the community and you've cared about it, and people have seen you, and now you're knocking the door saying, hey, I'm running now. I'd love to have your support. Why not? But if I've never seen you before, I didn't know anything about you. You just are nothing to me. And now you're knocking on my door saying all the things that you're going to do for me. You know, how realistic is it?
Is there a way of holding candidates that run on that? Or is there any accountable for those sort of promises? You know, are people holding them accountable? Like if somebody comes to your door and then, I mean, well, I guess you, but in general, and this isn't even a, you know, community of color. This is, you know, just in general, are we holding candidates accountable for what they run on and then how they actually vote? But I find that, you know, the less access you have to maybe news, or the less time that you have, or if you're working more jobs, or, you know, if you're, you know, struggling to find, you know, childcare, or, you know, just the more challenging your life is, the harder it is to be engaged and hold our candidates accountable for whether or not they're actually following through on the promises that they make, you know, in the election years. So it almost feels, you know, like I wish there was some way that we could almost do like a report card. I mean, I guess there is sort of a report card of how people vote, but I feel like that information isn't shared enough, isn't accessible enough, that we rely on people to kind of go to websites and look at people's voting records. I wonder, I wish, you know, if there was a way to really show, based, you know, on some kind of a report card or something, where candidates are voting on issues that reflect on different communities, whether it's LGBTA issues, or, you know, and I feel like, you know, some of the caucuses are trying to do that. The Progressive Caucus definitely has a list of issues that we feel very strongly about and that we are holding our candidates accountable for. And I definitely see the LGBTA caucus do that. I see the Disability Caucus do that. Do you know anything about the Black Caucus here, or is there any group or any organization that you know that's trying to hold candidates accountable to communities of color or to the Black communities?
The Black Caucus also does a slate cart as
Mhm.
well. And there are organizations out there that are trying to hold candidates more accountable.
Right.
Of course, we could do a better job at it
Mhm.
because when you're talking about an elected official
Right.
who's running again, now they have a track record.
Right.
But someone running for the first time
Right.
doesn't.
Sure.
So you have to kind of look at their past to kind of
Mhm.
see where they're also going in the future.
Right.
And I'll give you one big example that I always use. So if you ever hear this question pop up, Natasha Goodley asked it.
Okay.
I wrote it on the paper.
All right.
You have a lot of candidates that will tell you how they're going to bring jobs to communities of color, and I'm going to bring, economic development, economic growth, and I promise there'll be more people put to work.
Mm.
And my question to them, and it's usually, Caucasian candidates, but my question to all candidates at that point is, your candidacy, your campaign is ran like a business.
Mm-hmm.
And you as the candidate are the president and CEO of your business.
Mm-hmm.
So from your business, how many people of color have you hired?
Mm-hmm.
And usually that would be 0.
Right.
So if in your own business, you don't stop to even think to bring a person of color to the table,
Right.
why am I to believe that once you're elected, you're going to make certain that you surround yourself with all these people of color to help better the community?
Mm-hmm.
You do what you do.
Sure.
So, and that does not include people outside waving signs or passing out literature.
Sure.
But do you have a person of color that actually is sitting at the table helping you make decisions?
Right.
Not just the person of color organizer, but a person of color making decisions.
Right.
And 9 times out of 10, the answer is no.
Mm.
So if you had no intention then you probably have no intention later.
Right. Valid point. That's a good point. Gosh, I feel like we've covered all the things that I had here on my list, but I also feel like we could go on talking forever.
We could.
Is there anything, I know that we said before that we had pretty much touched on things. Is there anything that you're doing or anything that you want to talk about that we haven't covered here that you think has an impact on the community or anything you want to touch on?
I'm not doing anything right now. I'm looking at possibly like this summertime feeding,
Right.
what I could do. I don't know exactly what that would look like or how that would be shaped, but that's something I'd love to do.
Right.
I have a million ideas of helping people, but I also would like to do something with, and I have to do the air quotes, feminine hygiene products, because I know some people said, you don't use the term feminine, but I don't know however else to describe it.
Oh, okay. Huh.
But female hygiene, I don't know. But you never learn about, like when I was doing the overdue lunch balances and I was seeing what the schools had in their food pantries, they also have non-food items, because if you do qualify for food stamps, that's great, but you can't purchase toilet paper and soap and shampoo with food stamps.
Sure.
So they said that was a big ticket item. And of course, feminine hygiene products was one of them. And that's when it dawned on me that you have children that if your parents don't have money and you don't really even have food, are you really having access to the feminine hygiene products that you should in order to be able to go to school and keep yourself healthy by changing them regularly? And so that's something I would love to see, is just making certain that every woman or girl has access to feminine hygiene products.
Yeah, I actually watched one of the things that come up on Facebook about houselessness, and there was one on houseless people and feminine hygiene and ways they've had to become creative and things that you don't think about, and how that's often not talked about when you talk about the epidemic and the problems. So I really appreciate that there are people in our community that are bringing light to real human instances of these issues, and not just, a broad spectrum of these epidemics that we have. And I really hope that you come back later
I'd love to.
And talk more because there are so many other things I'd love to talk to you about.
Yes.
But I appreciate you coming by tonight. And if anybody wants to get in touch with you regarding maybe food insecurity, any of the projects that you have coming on, anything that they're interested about as far as the Black Business Bus Tour or any of the things that you've talked about, what's a good way for people to reach you?
You can reach me directly at the office number, which is 813-847-8586.
Mm-hmm.
And also by email, which is info at white, the color white, WHITE, and spelled out AND, Black, BLACK, consulting, consulting.com. I know it's long.
And I know you're being humble, but I have turned a few candidates in your direction, and the stuff that I've seen you do for them is amazing. You're everywhere. You're always taking pictures. You're always posting the pictures. Like, I don't just refer to people to you when candidates are like, who can I call? Because like, I like you. I also do it because I think like you do an amazing job in your consulting firm and what you do for candidates. So I just want to say that. But thank you again so much for joining us. Thank you, listeners. I hope you've enjoyed this. We've tried to keep it a little bit shorter this time, so that it's not so long. I'm sure my husband will edit that out. And have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.